Rees-Mogg on State of the Nation tonight. The Taylor Swift scandal is deeply demeaning for the Prime Minister's office. The idea that the head of government is prioritising celebrity glamour with a blue light escort for a pop star sends the wrong message. It undermines public trust and reinforces the notion of two sets of rules, one for the rich and powerful and one for everyone else. The Prime Minister should be focused on the British people, not fawning over fame. In good economic news, inflation has fallen below 1.7%, well below the incompetent Bank of England's forecast of 2.1%. But the Chancellor is said to be trying to find 40 or even 50 billion pounds of tax rises for the budget. Will Labour's tax and spend never end? As a prelude to tomorrow's exclusive debate between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, only on GBNews, I'll be asking Popcorn what it expects from our new leader. In the return of the book club, I'll also be asking how we can do better than Rachel Reeves, with Lord Moynihan of Chelsea, author of the compelling Return to Growth, addressing the UK's economic crisis. He warns of stagnant growth, rising debt, and the urgent need for reform, and discusses his solutions for reversing the decline and what it could mean for the future of the UK economy. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my formidable panel, former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and historian and broadcaster Dr Tessa Dunlop. As ever, let me know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me at mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB newsroom. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held an emergency meeting on increasing Gaza aid. It comes after the US threatened to take away some military support unless Israel boosted aid within 30 days. It comes as fighting continues in Gaza and Israel also hit Beirut for the first time in 5 days, while Hezbollah has fired more rockets into northern Israel, injuring at least 2 people. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said he is looking at sanctioning 2 Israeli cabinet members. Now, it's being reported that senior UK ministers have written to the Prime Minister expressing their alarm at the scale of spending cuts in the October budget. Multiple members of Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet have sent formal letters to the Prime Minister about cuts they're being asked to make in the one-year departmental spending review to be announced alongside the budget. It comes as inflation has dropped below the 2% target for the first time in over 3 years. Figures for September show it fell to 1.7%, the lowest since April 2021. Analysts had expected a smaller fall to 1.9% and now warn inflation could rise again, with higher energy costs on the horizon. The government is scrambling to find more hotel spaces for migrants after a surge in small boat arrivals. Almost 14,000 have arrived under Labour, overtaking the number of crossings under the previous government in 2024. Meanwhile, Italy has begun sending asylum seekers to Albania under a controversial new plan, with a naval ship arriving on Monday, transferring 16 men from Bangladesh and Egypt. Italy says up to 36,000 asylum seekers could be sent to Albania each year, but only non-vulnerable men from safe countries will qualify. And finally, Prince William has defended his work trying to tackle homelessness despite his own privileged royal life. In a new ITV documentary, the Prince of Wales is quizzed about critics who might question whether he is the right person to lead the project, which is designed to eradicate homelessness in 6 locations around the UK.
There will be some people who might question whether you're the right person to lead this project and its efforts to end homelessness. How would you respond to that?
I think everyone having a right to a safe and stable home benefits us all. I come with no other agenda than desperately trying to help people who are in need. And I see that as part of my role, is that why else would I be here if I'm not using this role properly to influence and help people where I can. And I like a big challenge. I do like that, but I can't do it on my own.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Why does the Reverend Starmer behave like a lovesick teenager towards Taylor Swift? It is really extraordinary. He is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. He holds one of the great offices, not just in this country, but globally. He is a serious, supposedly, international figure. And yet, for free tickets, he seems to be quite easily put in the pocket of promoters. He then gets lucky Reverend Starmer, 10 minutes of her time. Do you remember the humiliation of poor old Gordon Brown, rather distinguished figure in his way, when he was desperate to see Barack Obama and he managed to meet him in the kitchen of some swanky hotel for 10 minutes as a brush past? Well, at least Barack Obama was President of the United States, was important, had a global role to play. He wasn't some pop star. But in return for this precious 10 minutes, he provides police escorts. Not only that, but about half the cabinet seem to have lobbied for these police escorts. The Home Secretary, the law officers seem to have got involved, with the police not being entirely happy with the whole setup. And this seems to me, frankly, embarrassing for a middle-aged man to be behaving in this way. It's beneath his dignity, and it's certainly beneath the dignity of his office. And it then brushes up against the ministerial code. Now, remember, the Reverend Starmer, praise be, was going to make politics more honest. He was going to clean up the Augean stables that the Tories had left behind. He was going to be whiter than white. Like Caesar's wife, he was going to be above suspicion. But the ministerial code says that even the appearance of influence in return for hospitality is wrong. And on this occasion, the appearance is extraordinarily clear. You got not just one set of free tickets, but 2 sets of free tickets, and then a nice little brush past. And in return, Miss Swift got a police escort. Free tickets, and then you get an escort. But this surely is not what should happen, because it's about your concept of the individual and the state. In this country, the only people who get escorts are either foreign visitors who need it for their security reasons or because of the state they represent, and the King and the Prime Minister. Very occasionally, it's given to other ministers on urgent national business when they are doing something that is essential for the country. It's not given just to the wealthy, because if it could be bought, if it could be sold to the grand and the rich, then all the rest of us are held up at their convenience on the King's Highway. And this is clearly improper. Every minute saved by Taylor Swift is thousands of minutes lost to the people who were held up whilst this was going on. But surely that's not the sort of society we are. We are a democracy. We are a free society where the state doesn't allow the rich just to trample on the rights of the many. But socialism always does, because socialism is always about the collective rather than the individual. They are important, and we, the little people, are not. And they don't care if it wastes police time and resources. That's not what matters. Bear in mind, in the Soviet times, they had ZIL lanes for officials to go ahead of the people of Moscow. And this is why it's such an affront to the people who were delayed. It is selling off the freedom of the British people, but it's also selling it so cheaply. 4 tickets and 10 minutes. If you're going to be a bit dodgy, you ought at least to get something out of it. Dodgy, down market, that, I'm afraid, is the Reverend Starmer. As ever, let me know what you think. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by a most formidable panel, former Conservative MP Sir John Redwood and historian and broadcaster Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, I mean, you may understand this great attraction that Taylor Swift has for a middle-aged man.
Ah, you want me to propose the love story? Sadly, any reference to her lyrics, I know, will be entirely lost on you.
I'd
be a fearless leader. I'd be an alpha type. I've got to say, how on earth did you manage to cram in communist Moscow into your soliloquy?
It's the same thing.
Quite extraordinary. I think that a slightly tendentious link there between Starmer's England and the Kremlin's Moscow. Let's just unpick that. I worry about your ability with mental arithmetic. You've taken 2 and 2 and you've made 5. To be clear, and again, I don't expect you to have followed the Taylor Swift news agenda, but earlier in August, the whole of Vienna was at a standstill because of a terror threat connected to one of her gigs, and 3 were subsequently cancelled.
That's a very fair point.
Thank you.
And the Metropolitan Police said there was no threat to her in the United Kingdom, that threat having been dealt with, and that it was against the normal police protocols. And then there's interference from the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the Home Secretary and the law officer. The senior law officer is involved.
I think
if the police had said there was a threat, that's a completely different kettle of fish, but they didn't.
I think you and I both know that you're being disingenuous. This was operational and it was blue lit by the Metropolitan Police. Even
after political
the former
interference.
Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron wouldn't be drawn on this because he knows absolutely that you've seen a smoking pyre and you're desperate to light it, to make it go boof. I would suggest you need to look elsewhere. This proves that Starmer has political clay feet. We know that already, but nothing more.
It seems to me that it is quite improper for his Chief of Staff to have intervened when he was getting free tickets. This clashes with the ministerial code.
Yeah, I think you made a very powerful case. And one of the problems, of course, with this story and why it's dragged on for so long is they've been so reluctant to tell us the truth. And it would be much better if at the beginning they'd set out that, yes, there were free tickets and no, there wasn't any improper intervention, or this is the intervention we undertook. And they've allowed this rumour and this allegation to build up. And it now sounds very powerful.
And the free tickets go very wide. It's not just the Prime Minister. The Home Secretary got them conveniently via her husband so that they weren't declarable. Sue Gray's son got free tickets. And this just looks so grubby.
No, I think it looks very bad indeed. And as you rightly say, we were told there was going to be change. And one of the big areas of change was to get rid of some of the mistakes Conservatives have clearly made in their years in office. Instead, this looks as if it's on an industrial scale, that they're all into these freebies. And I remember when I was a cabinet minister, I was very reluctant to accept freebies, and it had to be a purpose related to my job where it had been wrong for me not to have gone to the event.
Oh, he did have a purpose. According to his Twitter account, it was a swift campaign stop. So there was a purpose to the photo.
But bear in mind, he went twice.
He went twice. This is when he's in government.
He's Prime Minister by now. He's going because he enjoys it.
What is the purpose of going as Prime Minister?
A crime. Look, I'm not going to justify Keir Starmer's behaviour. I think it's clumsy and timid in the extreme. It doesn't bode well for what's ahead of us. But at the same time, you say this is going on, and it's because you're hitting the repeat button again and again. This is the same old story.
Because we're having to drag the information out of them because we're not told the truth at the beginning. If they told the truth at the beginning, it would have been a one-day row and we'd have moved on.
But it's also quite clever. So Yvette Cooper gets a free ticket virtue of her husband.
Well, she's got a celebrity husband.
Hold on, costing £170.
Right.
If she'd been given 2 tickets for him, if it'd been done the other way around, they'd have been £340 and it would have been declarable. So there seems to be a very convenient attempt to try and keep things quiet, and they've gradually emerged as they've had to be ratcheted out of them. And that's what makes it so suspicious.
I concur with you. It's extraordinarily clumsy. I mean, they desperately need an Alistair Campbell to come and knock them into shape. They are amateur in the extreme. Let's hope they handle the economy with a little more decorum. But this isn't criminal. It's clumsy.
It's not criminal.
But why don't they have common sense? I mean, instinct would tell you, if you want to survive as a minister, that you don't behave like that.
Well, no offence, but
simple.
looking at you two, you're hardly the paragons of common sense. You're hardly the everyman that walks out into the street. You politicians are a curious breed.
Politicians make mistakes.
Yes.
But neither John nor I accepted lavish hospitality. We just knew that when people offer you hospitality, they want something. Where there's a tip, there's a tap.
Oh, Jacob, is it because you're so rich you never had to?
I think that's completely irrelevant, actually.
Well, that wasn't true of me, and I remember being offered some quite amazing things, and I just said, no, I'm a cabinet minister, I'm very busy. It was the best answer.
OK, well, sadly, I don't have an equivalent anecdote to share, but I'll take any free tickets anyone ever wants to give me.
But But you can't influence public policy. Yeah. However many free tickets you're given, you can't give a police escort.
I understand that.
And that's where it's wrong.
But that's where I think you're being disingenuous. The idea that operational issues are somehow channelled through Number 10. I mean, the one person, if that was the case, who really should take umbrage is Prince Harry, to be honest.
Well, he's got a case. He has got a case because Number 10's interference seems to have been a part of the decision.
If your thesis stacks up.
Well, it seems to stack up pretty effectively. Coming up, ahead of GB News' exclusive debate between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch tomorrow, what can we expect and what role will Conservative Party members play in deciding their next leader?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Catherine Richards and Jake Singleton-Hill featured on the reality show Love is Blind.
Well, Catherine and Jake are joining us now in the studio for Saturday Morning Live. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is perhaps not the end result that people might have thought that they'd be seeing at this point, because you were both on the show, but you didn't fall in love in the pods, did you?
No, we didn't. I rejected him.
You guys look great together.
Yeah.
Very happy as well. It seemed like you guys were really strong, and it almost seemed like Freddie, after he admitted to you that he'd cheated in the past...
I actually respected the fact that he told me up front. I didn't even want to have that conversation, obviously. That was a conversation that we got told to talk about. And I respected his decision, but I think he felt that I was holding this grudge towards him that she really doesn't like, and which was not, and he knew this, because off camera we had many conversations where I was like, thank you for owning up, like, we can just move on from this. But if anything, I think he just felt guilty the whole entire time, and he put that on me, which is fine, but yeah, there's obviously a lot that people don't see. So
for viewers who don't know, Love is Blind is where you go and seek love and romance, but you don't see who you're speaking to, right?
No.
Jake, why did you go on the show?
My parents actually met in a very similar way. So my stepdad was texting my mum. He'd basically stolen the number off of a friend because the friend had met my mum in Blackpool, and they were texting for like 6 months. They'd never met. So that premise of how they got together and the marriage that they had was stunning. And to build a relationship not based on looks before you met, I just found that just incredible.
So do you believe in that concept? Is it lust or love at first sight?
It's weird.
It's a bit of both.
I think, it's definitely a bit of both. And I always say, as you get older, your looks will change, but your personality will stay the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Save the Nation. Your mail mogs have been steaming in. Alan says, Taylor Swift's next hit, Blue Lights, featuring the Reverend Starmer. Very good idea. And Mike says, Starmer is flitting around Taylor Swift because he's out of his depth and doesn't know how to behave. He completely lacks any natural authority. He blew a fuse about Johnson and he has already committed far greater sins. And Jeffrey says, when are we going to call presidents to cabinet ministers what they are? In capital letters, bribes. Well, that's a very interesting point. I'm not sure I'm going to say that, but then I'm a kindly and gentle figure, particularly when talking about the Reverend Starmer. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock on GB News, the battle for the Tory leadership continues as Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch enter a gladiatorial ring with a live debate. But what can we expect to see from these two candidates? And what is the crucial role Conservative Party activists and members will play in choosing their next leader? Well, I'm joined now by the head of campaigns at Popular Conservatives, known to its friends, Popcon, Andrew Allison. Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob.
Coming in. Popcon has surveyed its members, and who did the members broadly want to be leader of the party?
Well, we first started surveying our members back in July, and we've done 5 since then. And consistently, by far and away, the 2 most popular candidates have been Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. Indeed, I wish I had £1 for every time someone said to me, well, if only those 2 could get into the final, but the MPs will never allow it. Well, by one way or another, they are through to the final. So I'm really pleased about that, and I think Popcon supporters are really pleased about that.
So the MPs have done the right job for once?
Well, they have. It might be by accident, but they certainly have, yes.
And you've sent out a survey to the 2 campaign teams to try and find out what they think on detailed Tory policies. What have the responses been, and what do you think you can draw from that?
Well, Robert Jenrick answered all our 12 questions and submitted 1,000 words that we've sent to Popcon supporters today. Unfortunately, Kemi Badenoch did not reply. Now, I have no reason to think that it was malicious or trying to snub us in any way. It's just that she hasn't replied.
Campaign's a very busy time.
Well, indeed, and I know that she's out on her hustings this evening and she's doing GB tomorrow evening, so I'm sure she's very busy.
And what are the key issues for Popcon members? What are they focusing on, and what, therefore, were you trying to get to in the survey?
Well, Robert Jenrick has made it clear that he wants the UK to leave the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, and he's very clear, whereas Kemi Badenoch is not as clear as Robert is. I think on things like internal Conservative Party reform, which may not be a particularly sexy subject for GBNews viewers, but it is important to the members of the Conservative Party, that Robert, again, has been very clear and given concrete proposals. Indeed, if he wins the leadership, then you will become the chairman of the Conservative Party, which is very popular amongst Popcon.
Well, that's reassuring to know. And obviously, I therefore have an interest in this contest. Do you think withdrawal from the Human Rights Convention is the panacea to government? Is that what Popcon members are wanting? And do they think that it will allow the government to get back to governing, or is it more complex than that?
It is much more complex than that. We're run by a quangocracy at the moment, by civil servants, by committees. Ministers can't get things done. If you look at the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, the head of the OBR has more power, arguably, than the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So there's a whole range of things that we wish to reform. And in all fairness to Robert Jenrick, he has realised that, and I think he's seen that firsthand, hasn't he, in the Home Office.
And how into the detail do Popcon members get? Are they emailing you saying, we must get out of the ECHR, we must reform the quangocracy, or are they saying, we want a Conservative leader who's more Conservative?
Well, they certainly want that. That's without a doubt. But they do get into the detail. They are very engaged. I mean, we've got almost 10,000 supporters on our database, and the vast majority of those people are members of the Conservative Party. Therefore, they have a vote in this leadership election.
And indeed, quite a high percentage, because we think, there are about 100,000 members who will have a vote. So a big-ish percentage of members of Popcon.
Yeah, well, indeed, it's around about 10% of the total membership. Now, if you look at the opinion polls that are going around, if you look at the betting markets, it's looking that Kemi Badenoch is in the lead. So Popcon has decided narrowly. We did have a lot of deliberation in this. It wasn't a sort of a spur-of-the-moment decision, as you can imagine. But we did decide that on balance, we felt that Robert Jenrick was the candidate that we should support. But of course, we've seen polls before, haven't we, go drastically wrong, and the betting markets don't always get it right. And we are recommending to Popcon supporters that they vote for Robert.
And the ballot papers have just gone out, so they'll be getting this. It's a very timely intervention. You haven't backed Robert just in a sulk because Kemi's replies didn't get back.
No, not at all.
Throwing your toys out the pram and said, you haven't replied, I'm not backing you.
As your sister, obviously my colleague Annunciata, said to me, she said, we've been discussing this for weeks, haven't we? Even just privately. I mean, we really have. I mean, I've been to hustings. I've heard Robert. I heard Robert at the conference. I've been to some hustings in where I live in Beverley in East Yorkshire, where Kemi's addressed it. I mean, this is something that we've taken seriously. But I go back to what I said at the beginning. we do have two strong candidates. We do have two candidates from the right, which we didn't expect, did we?
No, indeed.
And we've got two who do want reform, both in the way that we do government and reform inside the Conservative Party. It's just that we feel that Robert has the edge.
And interestingly, in terms of the responses that you've had, this plays to expectations that Robert is good on the details of policy. He knows about them, he's thought them through. But Kemi is unquestionably a more charismatic figure.
Yes.
How important is that politically, and that if she were leader, Keir Starmer would be very nervous on Wednesday mornings, wouldn't he?
Well, he would be. He may be nervous of Robert Jenrick as well. I mean, if you look back to 1975 and Margaret Thatcher coming in as leader of the Conservative Party, most people on the Labour side regarded her as a joke, a figure of fun. And she grew into the role.
Jim Callaghan consistently won PMQs against her,
did.
even a year after she had been after she'd become leader of the opposition. But Kemi would be quite a force at the dispatch box, and she's shown she can be in previous encounters with Angela Rayner and others.
But of course, I mean, all the candidates. I mean, James Cleverly, for example. I mean, James is a really good performer, and you would hope that James would have a role, whoever won this leadership election. And if Robert wins, you would hope that Kemi has a role, and if Kemi wins, you hope that Robert has a role.
How do either of them, and how do Popcon want either of them to deal with reform? You've mentioned reform with a small r.
Yes,
Let's now talk about it with a capital R.
Well, we have to unite the right, don't we, Jacob? And certainly, from the emails and the messages that I receive, our supporters do want that to happen. I mean, it's pretty clear, isn't it? The Conservative vote went down to the low 20%. I'm not saying it's as simple as just to add the reform share of the vote on and then you end up with what the Conservatives would have got, because it's a lot more complex than that. And in many ways, the Conservative Party has completely let Conservative voters down over the last few years. But certainly, Popcon supporters do want to unite the right again.
And there are people in reform who do. I was walking home earlier this afternoon and somebody came up to me and said, when are you coming over to Reform? Reform clearly want us to join with them. We want them to come back to us. Is Popcon essentially the Reform wing of the Conservative Party?
I wouldn't describe it as that. I think we just describe ourselves as the Conservative wing of the Conservative Party. I mean, you recall during the Conservative Party conference, we have baseball caps with "Make the Tories Conservative Again."
Well, I'm glad to say that my youngest son, Sixtus, is going around wearing one.
Oh, well, that is very good.
He's wearing it the whole time. It's his favourite hat.
Oh, well, that's good, you see. So it has worked.
It's a very Jesuit line. Give me a child when he is 7 and I will give you a man. But he's clearly wants the Tory party to be Conservative again. And so how influenced do you think your supporters will be by your recommendation? How much weight do you expect that to
Well, they're a very independently minded bunch of people, Jacob. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And, when we've polled them, half have said Kemi, about half of them have said Robert. Whether it will make a huge amount of difference, I don't know. But I just think it's important as a movement inside the Conservative Party that we nail our colours to the mast. We can't just sort of sit this one out. We've tried to be fair to both candidates, and we have been scrupulously fair indeed to both candidates. And then it's up to our supporters to make a decision, just like every other member of the Conservative Party.
And you were mentioning your polling at the beginning, which wanted both Kemi and Robert to get through. And now they are both through. It's about 50-50 between them.
Yes, roughly, yes. I mean, there's a lot of undecideds there. And that came through on all our surveys. I mean, gradually the amount of undecided people was reducing, as you would expect, as the campaign went on. But undoubtedly it was between those two. People like sort of Mel Stride and even James Cleverly were not polling very well with our supporters.
Well, they're all going to have to watch the debate tomorrow if they're undecided to make their minds up, because tomorrow night, live on GB News, we bring you Decision Time, the race to lead between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. And you can get involved. Send in your questions to gbviews@gbnews.com with Decision Time in the headline of the email. And please don't forget to include your full name and where you are from.
Conservative MPs have finally chosen their top two for the leadership. And now, it's over to the members. Join me, Christopher Hope, tomorrow as Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are quizzed by Conservative Party members and myself at our GB News leadership event.
And afterwards, join me, Patrick Christys, with a live studio audience and a star panel as we discuss what it means for the Conservative Party and what it means for you. Decision time, the race to lead, from 7 p.m. tomorrow, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, you know what you're doing at 7 o'clock tomorrow, but coming up, UK inflation has dropped to 1.7%, raising hopes for interest rate reductions. But briefings indicate savage tax rises of £40 to £50 billion are in the pipeline. What lies in store for the economy?
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Still some pretty heavy rain around at the moment, but for many, tomorrow's going to be a fine day. We'll see some sunny spells, not as humid as today, but still pretty mild. Low pressures nearby. These weather fronts just dangling across the country have been producing pulses of heavy rain through the day. Still working northwards at the moment, especially wet over parts of northern England. Met Office yellow warning in place here, but staying pretty soggy over eastern Scotland. Rain moving across eastern England and out into the North Sea, and many western areas actually becoming dry overnight. It's not going to turn chilly though. Temperatures holding up in double digits. Many towns and cities staying in the teens. A drab start then early doors over eastern England, and a pretty wet start across parts of Scotland, particularly across the north. This rain slowly clearing away though through the morning. Actually, for rush hour through the central belt, it may well be drying up. Certainly elsewhere, many places having a dry morning rush hour. A lot of cloud initially over these eastern areas, but clearing away, and elsewhere we'll see some clearer skies coming through. Just maybe one or two scattered showers for Wales and southwest England, and as we get through the day we'll see a few more of those here and perhaps for Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. The rain over northern Scotland, that continues to move away, and for many it's a dry and a bright day tomorrow. Some pleasant autumn sunshine. Turning a bit breezy in the west as a few more showers come in through the afternoon, but most relatively light winds and still pretty warm. Not as humid as today, but these temperatures still well above the average for the time of year, mid to high teens. Friday will start a little cooler with some mist and fog maybe in places, but generally another dry day across the east. Increasingly cloudy further west with some wet and very windy weather in the northwest, and with high tides that could cause some problems. So there's a Met Office yellow warning in place for that, and the potential for more wet and windy weather into the weekend. So do keep up to date with the forecast. Bye for now.
Conservative MPs have finally chosen their top two for the leadership. And now it's over to the members. Join me, Christopher Hope, tomorrow as Kevin Badenoch and Robert Jenrick are quizzed by Conservative Party members and myself at our GB News leadership event.
And afterwards, join me, Patrick Christys, with a live studio audience and a star panel as we discuss what it means for the Conservative Party and what it means for you. Decision time, the race to lead, from 7 p.m. tomorrow, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. More mailmogs have been coming in, and you're very balanced as GB News viewers, because John says Kevin Badenoch is an engineering graduate, therefore by default a trained problem solver and innovating thinker. We need a leader with those key attributes. Robert Jenrick is just another lawyer. I'm not sure he is a lawyer, but never mind. The country is overrun with lawyers, and collectively they are a major reason why as a nation we're in such a bad place. Did you know that in the 15th century we passed Acts of Parliament saying there were too many lawyers and we should have fewer of them? This is a recurring theme of British politics. Anne says, when Kemi Badenoch went on holiday instead of touring the country at hustings with Rob Jenrick and the other four leadership hopefuls, she lost any chance of getting my vote. She has been missing in action too often in the last 3 months. Very balanced views, keep them coming in. In good economic news, inflation has fallen below 1.7%. Well below the incompetent Bank of England's forecast of 2.1%. But the Chancellor is said to be trying to find 40 or even 50 billion of tax rises for the budget. Will Labour's tax and spend never end. Well, I've got my formidable panel back with me, the former Conservative MP, Sir John Redwood, and the historian and broadcaster, Dr Tessa Dunlop. John, Mervyn King, Lord King, is a man I greatly respect. I think the last competent governor of the Bank of England, though if I said that to him it would make him blush, has said that Labour should just put up national insurance and be done with it. It's got to raise money and it's better to bite the bullet. Do you think he's right, or that actually they need an entirely different approach?
No, they need a completely different approach, and I was hoping for something radical and interesting, because I don't think the last government was nearly radical enough. The truth is we had a productivity collapse in the public sector, and that's at least a 20 billion cost. And we then got a lot of people of working age who aren't returning to the workforce quickly enough. Both main parties say they want to do something about it. Well, get on with it. We know that there are plans in the department, but neither government has yet managed to do it. And we know that the Bank of England is a wastrel bank, losing tens of billions of pounds on needless losses on selling bonds they shouldn't have bought in the first place, but they certainly shouldn't be selling them at big losses. No other central bank is doing that. If you controlled all those massive costs, you wouldn't need these great tax rises, and you would be able to afford the extra money you need in selective places within the public services in order to improve them. And you do need to change the control framework. I've no doubt about that. We've had this OBR control framework. It manages to bring us the worst of both worlds. It's tough on chancellors who want to grow the economy, but it doesn't control the debt. The debt has shot up from 2/3 of GDP to 100% of GDP over the OBR years. So the thing is a complete failure. It depresses growth. It puts the country in a bad mood. And if we had more growth, we would have more tax revenue and things would be a lot better.
And this great book by John Moynihan, which I'm reviewing shortly, points out that there is a maximum level of tax that the country is prepared to pay. It very rarely gets much above the mid-30s% of GDP. So just putting up taxes won't axiomatically balance the budget, because you'll find that not enough tax comes in.
Oh, it definitely make it worse. And I think this is holding back some of the ideas that we've seen in the newspapers that the Treasury have strangely allowed to circulate. And if you tax non-doms too much, they just go. So you then get less money from rich people. And if you tax employment too much with a national insurance hike, you'll have fewer jobs and you'll pay people less because the companies won't suddenly have all that extra money. So this book from John Moynihan is very good. It makes the point that if you keep the tax rates down, you collect more revenue and you grow faster. And growth is the key to the whole thing. Fortunately, the Labour government understands that bit. But every single policy they announce, with the possible exception of planning, is going to make growth less likely.
And Tessa, isn't that the problem? They had the Great Growth Summit, and they said things that John and I would agree with, but they then announced policies such as the employment reforms and the green agenda, the shutting down effectively of the North Sea and so on, that make growth much harder. And if there's a tax-raising budget of 40 to 50 billion pounds, that's going to be an enormous dead weight on the economy.
I feel desperate sympathy for Rachel Reeves. It's interesting listening to John speak with such authority, and actually off-air, both of you saying there hasn't been good economic growth for the last 15 years. And I just did my own little basic sums and I worked out that you'd both been in power for the last 14 of those 15. And then I listened earlier to the former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Laws, who spoke with great sympathy for the current Labour administration, because he admitted that while he came into the coalition government in 2010 and there was fat that could be pared off the bone, there were legitimate savings that could be made with George Osborne's austerity. There are no savings that can be made at the moment because of the mess, forgive me, that your administration left. Part of the reason was this bonkers, ideological, economic wrecking Brexit, where everybody lost their common national sense and we nosedived. And incidentally, just very quickly, last time I came on air here and I said to both of you, and there is an authority gap, you wear dark suits, you have an economic background, etc., people are more likely to believe you, even sometimes me. I sat here and I said, oh, look at Dublin, and the way in which it's flourished like a phoenix from the flames in recovering since the 2008 crash in comparison with Northern Ireland and shrinking Belfast. And immediately John said, that is because of the low corporation tax. I go home, yes, that is true. It was the initial reason why Dublin sprung ahead. But then the second spike in the graph was when they claimed all the people leaving London, the exodus in the wake of Brexit.
It's actually that they massively cut public expenditure in response to the financial crisis Our growth stops in 2008 because of the bust. Public sector productivity hasn't grown since 1997. This is not a Tory-created problem. And there is huge fat. We had plans to get rid of 100,000 civil servants, which the Labour Party's just abolished.
That's honestly disingenuous, and I think
it's not. It's completely true. I was responsible for it.
It's not true, and I have to explain.
It was easy to work the path through.
Just to go back to that point on the Republic of Ireland versus Northern Ireland, there is actually a spike in the economic graph post-2016, kicking properly in 2020.
This is the digital companies from America making huge sums of money and booking it through Ireland. It was great for Ireland.
We're going to have to move on, but following on from this economic discussion, the book club is back. I talked to Lloyd Moynihan of Chelsea, the author of the eye-opening book Return to Growth, which addresses the UK's economic crisis. If you haven't had enough of this discussion, we're going to be taking it further.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Ed Barker, a talented saxophonist and clarinetist from London, has had a remarkable journey in the music industry marked by significant achievements and an unusual crossover into the political sphere. Having honed his musical skills from a young age, he played in both the National Youth Orchestra and the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. In 2012, he became the solo saxophonist for pop legend George Michael. His reputation in music opened doors in politics, where he's worked with various leading Conservative members of Parliament and played a role in a number of major campaigns. To tell us more about the harmonious relationship between music and politics, I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Barker. This is quite puzzling, actually. How did a reputation in music get you into politics?
It's a good question. It's probably a question I'm still wrestling with at the age of 40. How's it happened? But somehow I've managed to do both, and I still enjoy doing them both at a high level. I think it's a simple thing of when you're in politics, you're known as the saxophone guy, and when you're in the saxophone music industry world, you're known as the weird conservative political guy. And so it's just something people can remember you by, regardless of how good you are at either of those two things. I think it's just a device that people can kind of just latch onto to remember you.
But it's the word weird, because I imagine that most people in the music industry are probably somewhat to the left. Yeah. Certainly all the ones that I've met are. I mean, I can't imagine you and George Michael discussing Tory politics with approval, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, I don't tend to talk politics with people kind of when I'm not in politics somehow. And whenever there are political disagreements, people kind of, I think GB News actually gets closest to kind of embodying this spirit. People are very kind of up for learning from each other's kind of experiences and views and not biting each other's heads off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The book club is back, and this week I talked to Lord Moynihan of Chelsea, the author of the eye-opening book Return to Growth, which addresses the UK's economic crisis. We discussed his solutions for addressing the decline, and he offers bold ways of making things better to reverse the decline, and discusses the long-term implications for the UK's future if action isn't taken soon. Well, John Moynihan, Lord Moynihan of Chelsea, thank you very much for joining me to talk about your book, Return to Growth. In your view, what is the main problem that is stopping the UK economy growing?
Well, in the book, Return to Growth, I actually say three things, but they're all interlinked. The first is the government's too big. The second is that taxes are too high. And third is that regulation is too constricting and all-enveloping. Now, all of these things live together. If you had a much smaller government, you wouldn't have to tax people so much. If you had a smaller government, it wouldn't be interfering so much. And part of the size of government is all to do with these hundreds and hundreds of regulators that we have set up, quangos, scolding them and telling them not to do X, Y, and Z and finding them if they do. So they're all interlinked. It's basically of a point of view of, well, the high regulation is due to government people thinking we know best. And we know better than you what's good for you, what's good for the economy. And of course, that's been massively discredited over and over again around the world. Governments don't know best, and the more the governments interfere, the more they constrain the economy. We're a force for good, and if there's a problem, we need to pour money into it because we're the only thing to save people from being devastated by these problems. And of course, therefore, we're going to have to tax you. And who we're going to tax, by the way, is not me, not thee, as somebody in America said, it's the fellow behind the tree. I had a thing that I called the laugher curve, i.e. who's laughing. And it's a curve that looks like this. At this end are people who are not millionaires, who think, oh yes, we should tax them more. At this end it's billionaires. They think millionaires should be taxed more because they got so much money they don't really care, and they know how to get around tax too. The only ones who are not very keen on millionaires being taxed more are millionaires. But nonetheless, and of course, that has resulted in this huge flood of people leaving the country. But that laugher curve, I think, sort of sums up the false optimism that governments have that they can get ever more taxes at an ever higher rate.
Everyone wants somebody else to be taxed.
Correct. And the objective of the book was to say, what do you need? And it leaves unsaid, how do you get that? It needs an electorate who have a greater sense of personal responsibility, who have a sense of duties as opposed to rights. Everything's all about rights, and if I've got the right to this or that, then the government has to provide that right, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So that there does need to be a change in view. If 54% of the electorate, of the taxpayers, are getting more from the government in money than they are paying in tax, and if I don't think all of them necessarily think that's a great thing, but it's quite difficult to speak against your own financial interests, particularly when life's hard and you've got all these obligations I was talking about, and you need the money. But unless this is all about a change in attitude and everybody beginning to understand that what we've got right now doesn't work. And I think that's penetrating, and after 5 years of Labour, it's going to penetrate it.
And things are actually considerably worse than we think.
Yes.
There's the pension fund liability.
Yes.
And this is a huge distortion between the private sector, which is now almost entirely defined contribution benefits, and the public sector, which is unfunded benefits.
Yes, it almost doubles, and it's why most of the public sector will always vote for the left, because the left are more likely to guarantee their pensions. And you can sympathise with somebody who's told, when you retire at 65, and by the way, you'll be alive for another 30 years on average at that time, you're going to get 60% of your salary for life, however long you live. That's an enormous, wonderful benefit. The trouble is we can't afford it. Somewhere around 2050, I think, we're going to be paying out £128 billion a year on the obligations we've already incurred to public sector workers, never mind all the ones we'll be incurring between now and then. The reason nobody does anything about that is because the politicians, the MPs, all get that same wonderful defined benefit pension.
I want to ask you one final thing. You say it'll take 15 years to do this. Does the British electorate have the patience, after how many prime ministers in the last few years, to wait 15 years? Or would a government that started down this route find that it couldn't survive long enough to implement it?
It might. I mean, Margaret Thatcher was saved by the Falklands War. She would have been out after her first term if it hadn't been for her tremendous leadership in that war. But at the same time, I've always found that the British electorate somehow does the right thing. Time after time, and obviously for me, the biggest example of this is Brexit, time after time, they've shown themselves sensible and willing to do it. We've got to be absolutely clear about what we're trying to accomplish. But people do want a better life for their children, not just for themselves. And if they know that if we carry on in this way, it's just going to get worse and worse. And we've got the example of the European Union. I mean, you've got the example all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world. There are countries that keep the size of their government low, that keep their taxes low, that keep their regulation low, and they're growing like a weed. And their citizens are richer than us. And that's across the board. Even the poorest citizens are sort of at the level of the second quintile of ours in terms of riches and so forth. So it should be possible. And I do offer a programme to do that. As you say, maybe it won't work, but electorates can be a hell of a lot more sensible than politicians give them credit for.
Well, I agree with that. Trust the people.
Yes.
John Lord Moynihan, thank you very much. And this is the great work, the great tome that you've produced. It looks quite intimidating when you pick it up, but I can assure readers it's not, that there are plenty of illustrations, lots of graphs, and it's beautifully printed in large print, so it's easier to read than it looks when I hold up this fat volume.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Jacob. Thank you.
Oxford University, home to centuries of academic prestige and excellence, has apparently got a bit confused when it comes to noble titles. You would think that for an institution that prides itself on scholarship, it could get the titles of those applying to be Chancellor of the University right. But alas, even Oxford has dumbed down on correct form. In its upcoming Chancellor elections, there are dozens of candidates, among whom there are an interesting but previously unknown collection of younger sons of dukes or marquises, to wit, Lord Peter Mandelson. Which dukedom does he belong to? Lord David Willits, perhaps an interesting marquisate there, and Lord William Hague. The style of Lord Christian name only belongs to the younger sons of the most senior ranks of the peerage. It is not a style of nobility for a peer, as any fool knows. The correct style for a baron is Lord's surname, sometimes with a place name for clarity. Hence, the candidates are likely to be the Lord Hague of Richmond, and the Lord Mandelson, and the Lord Willits. In addition, there is the Baroness Royal of Blaisdon, who is even more peculiarly described in Oxford list. Lady Angiolini is also incorrectly titled, but she's not strictly noble, although to my mind she has the higher distinction of membership of the most ancient and most noble order of the Thistle. It really isn't difficult to get these titles right, and the administrators at Oxford, you would expect, are reasonably intelligent and ought to be au fait with the British system. I think getting this wrong makes the university look lazy and slapdash, and really very much third class in degree terms. Well, that's all from me. Up next, it's the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, hopefully it will be first class, Jacob. But the migrant who threatened to kill Nigel Farage has now released a video about me. So I'm going to make an offer to him at 10 p.m. Taylor Swift, the scandal. The left-wing journalists telling us that this is a non-story are quite often the same ones who are telling us to look the other way when the Hugh Edwards story broke, so I question their judgment. Should the German manager of the England national football team sing our national anthem in the dugout? Will we hold it against him if he does it? And foreign interference in the disorder following the Southport attacks as well. That's been revealed. Lee Anderson's on to talk about that. Do we think that Nigel Farage deserves an apology?
Well, that all sounds very exciting, and of course the football manager should sing the national anthem rather than talking about German overalls. Anyway, that's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock, as this time tomorrow GB News is hosting a debate between Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, battling out for the Tory crown. That's at 7 o'clock. I'm Jake Rees-Mogg, and the weather in Somerset, oh, it's absolutely splendiferous. You'll love it there.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Still some pretty heavy rain around at the moment, but for many, tomorrow's going to be a fine day. We'll see some sunny spells, not as humid as today, but still pretty mild. Low pressures nearby. These weather fronts just dangling across the country have been producing pulses of heavy rain through the day. Still working northwards at the moment, especially wet over parts of northern England. Met Office yellow warning in place here, but staying pretty soggy over eastern Scotland. Rain moving across eastern England and out into the North Sea, and many western areas actually becoming dry overnight. It's not going to turn chilly though, temperatures holding up in double digits, many towns and cities staying in the teens. A drab start then early doors over eastern England, and a pretty wet start across parts of Scotland, particularly across the north. This rain slowly clearing away though through the morning. Actually, for rush hour through the central belt, it may well be drying up. Certainly elsewhere, many places having a dry morning rush hour. A lot of cloud initially over these eastern areas, but clearing away, and elsewhere we'll see some clearer skies coming through. Just maybe one or two scattered showers for Wales and southwest England, and as we go through the day we'll see a few more of those here and perhaps for Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. The rain over northern Scotland, that continues to move away. And